Welcome to the RE Human Layer Security podcast, the show that flips the script on cybersecurity. I'm Tim Sadler, the CEO and co-founder of Tessian, and in each episode, I'll be interviewing IT and business leaders about why we need to protect people, not just machines and data, to stop breaches and empower businesses to achieve their missions. Hello and welcome to the RE Human Layer Security podcast. I hope you're continuing to enjoy this show. And if you are, why not leave us a comment or review? We do love hearing from you, and these reviews mean a lot to us. So please leave us one. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Kai Roer, a renowned security culture researcher with over 25 years of experience in cybersecurity, who was recently appointed the Chief Research Officer at KnowBe4. Kai is the author of 4 books on communication and security, including the title Build a Security Culture, and the founder of the CLTRE, a SaaS security culture metrics company that helps companies measure their security culture. Kai, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's awesome to be here.
Kai, you are considered one of the go-to experts in security culture today. So I'm going to start by asking, how do you define security cultures?
Well, security culture is a very difficult concept for many people to understand. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is that there is in our industry a lack of one clear definition. I've been making it part of my mission for the past decade and a half to come up with something. And in fact, we have in the security culture framework, which we published back in 2011, I think it was. The definition we use there is the ideas, customs, and social behaviors of a group of people that influences their security.
And your research into security culture metrics provides organizations with insights into some of the human factors that influence risk and security. Could you share some of the most interesting things you've learned about human behaviors in security through this work?
So certainly, Tim. I think one of the most important ones is that behaviors change. And what I mean by me finding that particularly interesting is that very often we don't even recognize or realize it ourselves when we adapt or change our behavior. Sometimes all it takes is a small nudge by some of your peers. For example, you say something and the way they respond to what you say makes you change how you communicate later. Another thing with behaviors is that training also works in some, at least sometimes. I'll use myself as an anecdotal proof here. It's a year and a half ago, after joining KnowBe4 for some time, I were failing a phishing assessment. Our company assess everybody and our ability to recognize a fish and then, do the right thing when we recognize it. Now, a year and a half ago, I received a very important email from someone very important internally with a very short deadline. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, it's like this. And I just responded directly without really checking anything. Now, obviously, this triggered an event internally in our systems, and the next day I received, "Hello, Kai. Yesterday you failed a phishing. Now here's a training for you." And I'm like, "Oh my God, how could I fail? I'm like this huge security expert." At least that's what people believe. And not only did I fail, now I have to pay the price, almost like going to prison, by having to complete a training. And I'm like, I've been doing this for so many years. I know what a fish is, especially when I see one, right? And then I go into the training and I'm like, oh, this was not at all what I expected the training to be. It's not generic. Instead, it's very specific, helping me identify the very specific fish that I felt for. And did it help? Well, it did. It took me almost another year before I almost responded to another phishing assessment. But I stopped myself because, oh, haven't I seen this before? Did I learn something about this? Oh, yes, I did. I don't want to, fail that again. So, yeah, behaviors can change, and it is possible to train them.
And what is key to changing human behavior with regard to security? What works and I guess what doesn't work? What is important to consider when you're trying to drive this behavior change within your organization?
I am pretty sure, Tim, that like myself, you know that the answer is extremely complex. We, and by we I mean both scientists and practitioners, know some about this, but probably not a lot. Definitively not everything. And why I put it like this is that yes, it is possible to change it. It is possible to change it in a controlled way, but we don't know exactly how to do that. Our company focus on trying to figure out what happens with employees who fall for phishing assessments, and then help them recognize those specific things to avoid falling for them again later. Whereas your company, if I understand it correctly, try to um, identify these things before they even hit the email of their employees. I think both of these tactics are really, really crucial, and it's going to help a lot. But um, what can you and your company, and what can we in our company do to make this even better when it comes to changing behavior? I think that exposure is definitively very important. So we need to make sure that employees are able to recognize these kind of things, but preferably the fake ones, not the real fishes, right? And also, I believe that when it comes to changing behaviors of the employees, working with them by making stuff easier to do instead of working against them by making it harder to do, or adding another procedure or another thing you have to do, is very, very helpful. And as I'm sure you know, scientists are agreeing with us by making it easier.
And you've also created the global de facto standard security culture framework. What is that, and how does it help organizations improve their security cultures?
So the security culture framework is something that came out after a number of years of consulting organizations around the world on building and improving security behaviors and awareness and culture. One thing I learned then was that although every single organization is unique and have their own specific needs and requirements and expectations, the process of managing that program, if you like, is similar or even the same, regardless of your company size, your company location, your industry, or whatever. And when I realized that, I was like, okay, so how can we use this to help the industry? And I decided that okay, let's take all that experience and put it into a framework, a process, a very easy 4-step model that will help people build better security culture by first understanding what their culture is like, so measuring it, and then by involving the organization by both getting key stakeholders to support the program, and also to understand that different employees require different kinds of trainings and focus. And then the step 3 is then adapting the content and how you convey the message to the target audience. And then you sit down and analyze your results before you do the whole thing again. I mean, it's like a Deming circle, right? A PDCA. Plan, do, check, act. But this time, the stuff you actually do is on security and security culture.
And how can an organization actually evaluate and measure culture?
In so many different ways, Tim. I mean, there are endless opportunities here, and I think that is part of the problem, right? And the problem is twofold. One, how do I then answer this question that Tim just gave to me? Because you can do it any number of ways. And every single organizations ask themselves the same question and end up with the same problem. There are so many different ways to do this, and many of them do it different ways, which leads to the second problem. How do you measure and evaluate your culture in such a way that you can compare next time you measure? So you need to decide and define those metrics or measurement instruments that you want to use, and then use them again and again over time and compare the results. Because if you one year choose to measure the phishing proneness of your employees, and then next year you decide to look at completion rates of their trainings, those are two very different metrics. To some extent, we may argue that both of them measure security culture, but how do you compare them? How do you know if you improved if you cannot compare those two numbers?
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. And the goal here is pretty obvious. We all want to have good security cultures in our organization, but tell us why that is important and what it looks like.
Yeah, so why it's important is like reduces risk and creates resilience and trust, which again reduces risk. So for me, it's that simple. Security culture or good security culture is about risk reduction. What does it look like? Well, that depends a little bit on your organization and what your requirements are. Like with security in general, there is no such thing as 100% security, or if it is, you can't afford it. And even if you can afford it, it doesn't really make business sense. And the same thing can be said about security culture. So good culture for you may be something that is an excellent or a poor culture for something else. But one thing that we have done at KnowBe4 Research is to come up with a way to measure security culture using a standard tool, which creates a scale where you can then know that you measure the same phenomena every single time. And you also get an indicator of how you are doing compared to other organizations around the world and against what we believe is a really or pretty accurate representation of the world out there. And in that context, good security is in the range 80 to 90, if I recall correctly. And that basically means that you as an organization score between 80 and 90 points in this measurement. And you should see that in, for example, a dramatic reduction in successful phishing attacks. So, for example, some of the research we've done show that if you have a good security culture, 1 in 1,000 phishing emails will successfully harvest credentials. And I mean, you and me, we probably will look at each other and think even 1 in 1,000 is huge. Yes. But if you compare it to bad security culture, then it's actually 1 in 20 of those same phishing emails will be successful. So that's one way of looking at a good security culture.
And I wanted to ask a question about some of the other factors that play into security culture. So things like the industry that an organization is in, or the geography of an organization or its offices. How do these other kind of external factors play into the security culture of an organization? Because presumably it's not all about the employees and their best intentions. I think most employees just want to do the right thing when it comes to security. But what about these other external factors that play a role with regard to people's, the the job that they're doing, the industry they're in, where they're located, and any others that you think are relevant?
So I think this is the question that intrigues me the most, and has for the past probably most part of my career, because I've always been working very internationally. So I've been exposed to a lot of different national cultures, regional cultures, communication cultures, languages, obviously, but also how those things reflect on organizations. So one example would be a multinational having offices, say, in Japan, Australia, and the US, and maybe in Europe. They would have four very different cultures work-wise, with some of them based on regulations, some of them based on cultural facts, and other kind of things. And then, of course, one of the very important questions we as an industry need to ask ourselves: how does those different cultures influence the security, or, to your point, the security culture, right? Because security culture is just a subset of organizational culture. And there is reason to believe that organizational culture, regional culture will influence also the security culture. In the beginning, we kind of had this hunch that it would, but we didn't really know if it did. Now we do. So part of the work that my team is doing here in Oslo is to look at how organizations around the world is actually doing both behaviors, how their knowledge plays a role, and how their culture plays a role. And what we see is huge differences. Africa, for example, one of my biases, being a white Western guy, is that Africa, third world, they would probably do very poorly when it comes to security culture and security behaviors, stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is that in most of the measurements we do, Africa comes out very, very near the top. Similarly, Europe and the US, well, my bias there would be that we have been exposed to computer technology and the internet for so long that we should be experts at this. But generally, we are not. We're not doing very well, actually. And then when we dig into the numbers, one thing that we did, and this hasn't been published yet, by the way, so it will come out later. But we've looked at the shadow IT around the world. So basically how employees rate the use of unauthorized cloud services or file sharing services, stuff like that. And the interesting here is that, again, Africa is doing best with less than 20% of them reporting knowing of that. And Asia reporting more than 50% of their employees knowing that the use of unauthorized cloud services and file sharing services are, happening. And Europe and the US are in the middle, 25 to 28%, if I recall correctly. And what this tells you is that culture matters, and it differs. It's different based on what organization you are in. It may be different based on what team or department you are in. It differs based on what industry sector you are in, and all these things influences your security culture. Now, why should you care about that? Well, two reasons, I believe. One is to realize that just because one team is doing something poorly or differently or not according to your standard doesn't mean that it's a problem. It just means that you will have to deal with them differently than others in the organization. And that realization leads to the second one. You need to adapt your efforts, both the technical controls, the policy controls, and the people controls, to be aligned with the needs of them who are out in the trenches, not your needs in the security office, but those people who are out there working. adapt your reality to them, and you will see your security culture also changes and improves.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, especially for CISOs of global organizations who've got employees in multiple regions, which, that adaptability is key. What other advice do you have for CISOs that are managing global companies in terms of instilling a great security culture?
Well, so realizing that you are a global company and what that means from a risk perspective, I think is very important. Because not only do you have to deal with the stuff that all of us have to deal with, as a global or nation state actors hitting your country and headquarters, you will also have to deal with the local criminal gangs trying to get a piece of your cake. But when it comes to security culture in general, I think it's really important to realize that different locations have different ways of communication. Different kinds of communication influences how they see the world, and how they see the world will influence how they both interpret the information you send to them, but also how they act on it. Just between the US and Norway, US tend to be much more hierarchical than Norway. But if you compare US to China, for example, US is not at all hierarchical. And this kind of relative context or relative culture is very important, I believe, for anyone actually working internationally to accept that is there, and try to understand where do I find myself relative to the other kind of cultures out there. And for a CISO, I think that is crucial.
Sorry for the pause there, Kai. I just was giving you room to finish that point if you needed it. Switching gears slightly, I'm going to talk about what poor security culture looks like. And I really enjoyed reading the recent KnowBe4 security culture survey. And in that, you found that organizations with a poor security culture demonstrated, I think it was a 52 times higher risk of employees sharing credentials. Now, that is huge. Why is that the case? And what does a poor security culture look like?
So let me go a little step back there. So yes, we published this research almost a year ago now, and before we dared to put it out there, we did not believe our own numbers. Because as you say, Tim, that's incredible. It is like huge. And it's huge in two senses. One is the actual practical implications, but also from a scientific perspective. I am not aware of any publications similar to this where one compare the actual behaviors of phishing in this specific, or sharing credentials actually in this particular research, and culture. So it's a huge new area, but it also has a huge impact. And of course, I'm very proud of my team who came up with this. We reviewed those numbers and we did all the calculations and everything 4 times before we did believing in it. But yes, so 52 times, that is employees receiving 1,000 phishing emails, and 52 out of those phishing emails will successfully harvest credentials. Or put differently, 1 out of 20 phishing emails will be successfully getting, all the stuff they need, the bad guys, to log into your systems. That is what a bad security culture looks like in numbers. And as I'm sure you know, and I'm guessing most of the readers will too, what happens when the bad guys get access to credentials to the kingdom, right? Ransomware, business email compromise, any kind of industrial espionage. I mean, just a short time ago, the Parliament of Norway, I kid you not, I will repeat that, the Parliament of Norway were hacked. And obviously, they would be scanning for secrets and communications and that kind of stuff. And I mean, this happens to anyone. But do you want to be those organizations with a poor security culture where you know that 1 in 20 of those phishing emails will be successful? Or would you prefer to have a good security culture where only 1 in 1,000 of those phishing emails will be successful?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I guess where I want to move to next is giving employees more training the answer to this. We speak about phishing simulation a lot here. Is it about training people, or is it more than that? How do you get employees to care about security?
So this is a challenging question, right? And it's been one of those questions that this industry has been asking, or tooting back and forth for at least the 3 decades I've been active in this industry. Do we train or do we not? Is technology enough? Do we only need policies? I think that the question is simple, but the answer is complex. But we can simplify it by reminding everybody of the people, process, technology image, right? And the point of the people, process, technology model is to realize or train or remember that if you change one of those 2 components, one of those 3 components, the 2 others will change too. Right? So if you implement a new technology but don't make a policy change or training, then you will see behavioral change based on that new technology, but you will not be controlling it with a policy. And if you don't train people in using the technology correctly, they are likely to come up with all sorts of ways to use it, right? So it makes sense to have some training and some policies. And the same is true with security. If you don't have a security policy, how do employees know that they are breaking it? Because technically they are not, right? So you need a policy. What about technology then? Your company is doing something that I believe is really important, which is to stop or remove as much as possible of threats before they even hit the employee's mailbox. Why do I believe that is important? Well, number one, it makes the employee able to actually do their job instead of sifting through loads of BS. But more importantly, we as humans, we have a certain amount of cognitive energy or fuel, if you like. And we can refill that every night when we sleep, but it goes down throughout the day. The more time you have to spend on evaluating, is this a fish? Is this a spam? Is this legitimate? Is this something I need to deal with? The more energy you waste, and the less energy you get to use on doing your job. So it's a very good business reason to have good technology. Not to mention the risk perspective, right? So by removing the threat or most of it, you reduce the risk too. But what about training then? As in my example earlier in this episode, I failed a fish. Now, this was an assessment, and I don't fail often. I would, of course, never admit to failing often, being a security professional, but I am a human. And because I am a human, I make mistakes. And because I make mistakes, occasionally I may also fail a phishing. And then how can I learn to recognize my own actions, my own behavior, so that I can self-control. And there, I think training plays a role. But the caveat here when it comes to training is that I do not believe in this annual, 1 hour, 2 hour training sessions where you are forced through a specific program. And when you're done, someone can check a box and say, well, we are compliant. That's not the kind of training I believe in. And it's not the kind of training my company believe in either, right? So at KnowBe4, we believe in timely, accurate training content that is relevant for you, the employee. And then I think it's very effective. But more importantly, I have facts, I have data to back it up. And that's why I love my job.
And we agree with that approach to training too. It's recognizing that people have got overwhelming to-do lists and so many responsibilities that they aren't always the security experts, and security isn't necessarily always in their job description. Technology can help empower people, and the way we think about that is so that they can get on and do their jobs without security getting in the way. And Kai, to wrap up all of what you've spoken about today and the advice that you have for our listeners, for security leaders out there who are thinking about ways to improve their security culture right now, what 3 steps do you advise that they can take?
There are not only 3, but if it has to be 3,
if it had to be 3,
measure. So that would be number 1. And by measure, I mean create a baseline, figure out where you are, and then use the same way to measure at some cadence, be it monthly, quarterly, annually. It doesn't. You have to adapt that to your needs. But then you can compare how you change. Sometimes, hopefully, it will be improvement. Other times, it will not. But if you don't already measure, get going. Secondly, understand that people are people, or also people are fallible, meaning that we make mistakes. It's not their fault that they make mistakes. It's their human nature. And the sooner we as security professionals accept the fact that people will make mistakes and that's not their fault, then we can actually put in place controls, technical, policy, and people to reduce the risk and help the employees do the right thing. And that would be the third advice. Make it easy for the employees to do the right action. Don't make stuff hard. Don't make it difficult. Don't create sludge. Instead, remove it. Make it easy to do the right stuff. Remove threats from their mailbox if you can. Give them the right kind of training, the one they need every single time, not whenever it suits you, but when they need it. Those kind of things.
Kai, I love that. So if I heard you, number 1, measure, measure, measure. Number 2, understand people are fallible. And number 3, we've got to make it easy for employees to do the right thing. We need to remove that sludge that you talk about. Kai, thank you so much for your time today. I think our listeners are really going to take a lot away from this conversation, particularly around the differences in culture and the importance of what you call adaptability in building security cultures, measuring it and making it work for everyone in the organization. Now, we like to finish all of our interviews with some rapid fire questions to get to know the humans on the Human Layer Security podcast a little bit better. So here goes. What's your favorite city in the world?
My wife wants me to say Stockholm. She's Swedish. But my favorite city in the world is Marseille in southern France.
And what's the best advice you ever received?
Be the best version of yourself. And I try my best every single day, and I'm not sure I succeed, but at least it's progress.
And imagine your diary is cleared for the day. How do you spend it?
Yeah, that's easy. I'll pack my gear on my motorcycle and I go enduro riding on trails and gravel tracks the rest of the day.
That sounds like a good way to spend it. Kai, thank you so much again. It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's been a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with more human layer security insights in our next episode. But if you can't wait that long, you can visit our blog at tessian.com/blog, where you'll find lots of amazing content, advice, and tips. And if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review it on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.